Alright, today we're going to be talking about classifying triangles. Lesson 8-6. You're going to need your spiral and your notes page that I handed out to you last week. We'll write a few things in your spiral and then fill in the worksheet as we move along through the notes today. Okay, the first thing we have to do is remember that a triangle is a polygon with 3 sides and 3 angles. Polygon is something that you should know from 6th grade. Polygon is a closed figure made up of line segments. So a triangle is a closed figure with 3 sides and 3 angles. The next thing you should write down in your spiral is if you add each of the angles in a triangle, the total will always be 180 degrees. That is super duper important. Make sure you copy that in your spiral. All angles in a triangle add up to 180 degrees. So write that down. Put a big star by it so you don't forget. Alright, now as we move along, we're going to talk about the ways to classify a triangle. And when you classify a triangle, it really means you're telling me what kind of triangle it is. And most of this you probably will know from last year as well. We're going to classify triangles by their sides and by their angles. Sometimes I'll just ask you to do sides, other times I'll ask you for angles, and still other times I'll ask you for sides and angles. Alright, let's get started with that. You have this piece of paper that I gave you. All you need to do is to fill it in. And this chart will help you work through as you classify. I would keep it handy. We're going to actually start over here on the left with classifying triangles by their sides. So you can fill these in as I go. Equilateral triangle. An equilateral triangle is a triangle with 3 congruent sides and 3 congruent angles. Here's a picture of an equilateral triangle. These blue markings that you see right here are called tick marks. And since they all have the same marking, that's how you know that those 3 sides are all congruent. And the 3 angles are all the exact same size. In an isosceles triangle, you have 2 congruent sides and 2 congruent angles. Here's a picture of an isosceles triangle. Again, notice the tick marks, they're exactly the same. So that lets you know this side is the same as this side. The 2 congruent angles in an isosceles triangle are what we call the base angles. I'm putting a purple dot inside the base angles. Base is the bottom. It's the 2 angles opposite of the point. Those are the 2 angles that are congruent. In a scalene triangle, there are no congruent sides and no congruent angles. Here's an example of a scalene triangle. Notice the tick marks. They're all different, so they're showing you that all the sides are different. Alright, we're going to move on to classifying triangles by their angles measured. An acute triangle is where all 3 angles in the triangle measure less than 90, because an angle that's less than 90 is considered to be acute. Here is an example of your acute triangle. Each of these 3 angles all measure less than 90. In an equilateral, they're all going to be the same, but they don't have to all be the same in an acute, but they do all have to be less than 90. In a right triangle, you have at least 1 angle that's a right. Remember, all triangles add up to 180, so 180 minus 90 leaves 90. That means these 2 have to be less than 90, but they have to add to 90. That also makes them complementary, like we learned yesterday. In an obtuse triangle, you have 1 obtuse angle, and the other 2 have to be acute. 180 minus 90, or 91, means that these 2 have to add up to 89, or something like that. You can pause the video here to get this copy down. in your notes. Make sure you have the examples. Alright, now we're going to practice a little bit using your chart. Okay, you're going to classify each triangle according to its sides and its angles. This is what I was talking about. There are times that you have to do both. So I want you to look at A. I see here that there's an obtuse, and these two must be acute. So I know it's an obtuse triangle. And if I smash these sides together, I can see that they're all different. So this would be an obtuse isosceles triangle. I'm sorry, an obtuse scalene triangle. I said those were not the same, but I said the wrong word. So again, it's an obtuse scalene. Okay, you try B, C, and D. Again, I would pause the video so that you can work them and then come back and check your answers. B, you can tell there's a right angle, so it must be a right triangle. And these two sets of tick marks show that these are the same and this one's different. So this is an isosceles right triangle. In C, I have a right angle, so I know it's a right triangle. And I can tell that these sides are different, so it's going to be a right scalene triangle. In D, I know it's a little hard to tell, but those two are the same, so I know it's isosceles, and that pretty much looks like a right angle, but I might have to get out a piece of paper to see. Okay, this one says isosceles obtuse, so the way that you can tell is if you take a square or something at the edge of your paper, you can stick it in there and you can see that that would actually be an obtuse. So sometimes you have to stick something in there. So I might stick this corner edge of my paper where this would be the right angle, and I can see it's bigger than that. So isosceles obtuse. If you're not sure, stick a piece of paper in there to let you know if it's a right angle or not. Alright, so now we're going to try some practice questions. Again, I would pause the video and try to answer the question before you see me put the answer up. You also have these in your notes. These are on the back side of that piece of paper. Mr. Oliveris installed a triangular piece of stained glass above his front door. That would be this right here. Which of the following best describes the triangle with the given measures? Well, let's see what I know. I know these two are 35 degrees. I don't know that one. I can also tell that these two marks right here let me know that they are the same. So I know it's isosceles, which lets me know that I can eliminate A and C. So the next thing I have to do is figure out, well, 35 and 35 makes what? 35 and 35 is 70. So if I know that all angles in a triangle add up to 180, then 180 minus 70 is 110. So this angle right here must be 110 degrees. So I know that this must be, it's not right if it's greater than 90. It must be obtuse. I hope you got that one right. Let's move on. This one says, find the missing measurements in this triangle. Then classify the triangle according to its size. So again, we'll pause the video and work this problem and then check to see if you got the answer correct. So when I look at this, I know that I have a missing angle. I have a missing angle right here. So that means I have to figure out what that measurement is before I can classify this triangle according to sides and angles. So I'm going to say, well, I know that box down there in the corner means I have a 90-degree angle, plus 22. So that's 2 and 11. So far I have 112 degrees. So I'm going to subtract and I know that that's 7 and 10. 10 minus 2 is 8. 7 minus 1 is 6. So that means this angle has to be 68 degrees. So my markings here tell me that it's scalene. And since I have an acute, and a right, I know that this is actually a scalene right triangle. Pen's a little hard to write with. All right, last set of questions. Two of the angle measurements of a triangle that Sean drew are 70 degrees and 50 degrees. Marcy drew a similar triangle. A, which is not one of the angle measurements of Marcy's triangle? And B, give the most specific name for these two similar triangles. So again, pause the video and see if you can answer the question before I tell you the answer. Well, I have to remember what similar means. Similar means that my sides are proportional and my angles are congruent. So similar means I have congruent angles. What does congruent mean? It means they're the same. So all I have to do is figure out which measurements would be the same. So if I have a 70 and a 50, I know if I add those together, that gives me 120. So that missing angle must be 60, because all angles in a triangle add up to 180. So if they similar has to be congruent, I could have 50, I could have 60, I could have 70. Which one is not? It has to be D. All right, moving on to B. Give the most specific name for these two similar triangles. Well, if I know I have 70, 60, and 50, this one's acute, 60's acute, 50's acute, so I know it must be an acute triangle. Well then, if I move back in my notes, I know that back here in an acute triangle, all three angles are less than 90, and I know that if there are, hold on, I lost my train of thought. Okay, if none of the angles are the same, look back here. If none of the angles are the same, then I must have no congruent sides, right? No congruent angles, so no congruent sides. So that leads me to believe that this must be a scalene acute triangle. All right, that sums it up for today. Okay, all angles add up to 180 degrees in a triangle. You can classify a triangle by its sides, or by its angles, or both. By sides, we would be talking about scalene, isosceles, equilateral, and by angles, it would be acute, right, and obtuse. Make sure your notes are filled in. You can go back and look if you need to. Make sure you bring it with you tomorrow to class. This is your homework. See you soon.